The lease agreement was already signed, my name was on it, and so was the address of the building my ex-husband had just threatened to have me removed from. My name is Simone Callard. I am 31 years old. I own a catering and event hospitality company called Callard Collective, based in Nashville, Tennessee. I built it out of a shared commercial kitchen I rented by the hour, a secondhand van I drove to every wedding, corporate retreat, and charity gala within a 60-mile radius. And 4 years of 7-day weeks that left me too tired to notice my marriage was already ending before I had the chance to save it. I built it without a single dollar from my ex-husband's family. I built it while his mother told every woman at her book club that I was neglecting her son to chase a hobby. I built it while his father reminded us at Thanksgiving that the restaurant industry had a 70% failure rate and that I should consider something more stable. I built it while my ex-husband smiled and said nothing, which I eventually understood was its own kind of answer. Before I go any further, drop your location in the comments. I want to know where you're watching from. And if you have ever had to prove yourself to someone who wrote you off before you even started, hit that like button right now, because what happened in my private dining room on a Tuesday morning in March is the kind of thing that sounds made up. It is not. I had spent 3 months preparing for that meeting. 2 years, if you count the work that made the meeting possible at all. The couple across from me were Vera and Philip Strand, co-founders of a regional hospitality group called Strand Collective that operated boutique hotels and curated food experiences across Tennessee, Kentucky, and Georgia. They were considering licensing my brand and kitchen methodology for their event spaces. The contract on the table would make Callard Collective the exclusive catering partner for 11 properties. It was the kind of deal that does not come twice. My operations manager, Bex, had been with me since year 2. She was seated to my left with a folder of supplemental documents and the practiced stillness of someone who had survived a lot of my high-stakes mornings. The Strands had their attorney present. The room smelled like the coffee service I had personally set up at 7:45 that morning. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. I was reaching across the table to pass Vera the revised exhibit when the door opened. My ex-husband walked in first. He was 34, wearing a fleece vest over a button-down like he had come from a weekend tournament, and he carried himself with the specific confidence of a man who has never had to wonder whether a room would make space for him. Behind him was his father, in a sport coat, and his mother, who paused in the doorway long enough to look at the room the way you look at something you've decided belongs to you. I had not spoken to any of them in 11 months. Vera set her coffee down. Philip looked at the door, then at me. Bex went completely still. I did not move. I had trained myself not to. "This is a private client meeting," I said, keeping my voice the same temperature as the room. "You need to leave." My ex-husband did not even glance at the Strands. He crossed the room, placed a legal-size envelope on top of the contract, and tapped it twice with 2 fingers like he was calling a meeting to order. "We're settling this today," he said. "Read it." I did not pick it up. His father moved to the side of the table and stood with his arms crossed, which is the posture he uses when he wants to communicate that he is the reasonable one in any given situation. His mother stayed near the door. She was wearing the expression she saves for moments. She has already decided she has won. "That is a petition," my ex-husband said, loud enough that both Strands could hear every word. "You are going to transfer 45% of this company into a joint holding structure with my name on it, or we are filing a marital asset claim that will tie your business in litigation for the next 3 years. You built this during our marriage. That makes it community property." The room was quiet enough that I could hear the ventilation hum. "We've been divorced for 14 months, I said. "The business was incorporated while we were married," his father said, as if he had rehearsed it. "The legal timeline supports our position." My ex-husband pulled out a chair and sat down like he had been invited. I looked at him sitting in my client chair, in my private dining room, in the building I had spent 2 years acquiring the right to occupy, and I felt something settle behind my sternum that was the opposite of fear. It was the specific calm of a person who has already thought through every version of this conversation. "You own nothing of this company," I said. "You contributed nothing to this company. You signed a postnuptial agreement in the 3rd year of our marriage waiving any claim to any business assets I developed independently. That agreement was reviewed by 2 attorneys and filed with Davidson County." His father's expression shifted slightly. "Those agreements aren't always enforceable," my ex-husband said. His voice had changed pitch by about half a note. "Mine is," I said. "But that's not actually what I want to talk about right now." I looked at him directly. "You just told me you'd have my business tied in litigation. You're threatening to do that in front of 2 people who are about to decide whether to sign a major licensing agreement with me. So I want you to think very carefully about what you say next." He didn't think carefully. He never did. "You think this location protects you?" he said, dropping into a register that was meant to sound like a warning. "My dad knows the property management company that handles this block. One call and your lease is flagged for review. You can fight me in court from a parking lot." His mother smiled at the doorway. I reached across the table and turned the room's speakerphone to face him. "Call them," I said. He blinked. "Right now. Call the property management office. I'll wait." There was a pause of about 5 seconds. Then his ego made the decision, the way it always did. He pulled out his phone and dialed. He held it up so everyone in the room could hear. It rang twice. "Landmark Property Services, this is Kevin." "Kevin, this is Dale Whitmore. I need to flag a lease review for a commercial tenant in the Meridian South building on Demon Bryan, Suite 114, a catering company." A brief silence. "Mr. Whitmore, which suite did you say?" 114, Callard Collective." Another pause. Longer. "Sir, I want to make sure I understand your request. You're asking us to review the lease of the owner of this building?" My ex-husband's posture shifted so slightly that you would have missed it if you weren't looking. "I was looking." "What did you say?" "Callard Collective does not lease Suite 114, Mr. Whitmore. Miss Simone Callard purchased the Meridian South building through a private LLC 22 months ago. Landmark Property Services manages the building on her behalf. We work for her. Is there something else I can help you with?" The whine went quiet. Then it clicked off. The silence in the room was total. I could hear Philip Strand exhale slowly through his nose. Bex had her hands folded on the table and was staring at the middle distance with the focused expression of someone trying very hard not to smile. My ex-husband was looking at his phone, the way a person looks at a map that has sent them somewhere they didn't intend to go. I stood up. I smoothed the front of my blazer and walked to the door. I opened it and held it without a word. 2 members of building security were already in the hallway. I had texted them 4 minutes after my ex-husband walked in. I keep that response time on file as a personal record. His mother's composure broke first. She stepped forward, hands raised. "Simone, we are your family. You cannot do this to." "You're trespassing," I said. "Please leave before I file a report." She left. Her husband followed without speaking. My ex-husband was last. He stopped in the doorway and turned back. And for just a second, I saw underneath the performance. He looked like someone who would bet everything on a hand he was certain he was holding. "You'll regret handling it this way," he said. "I own the building you just tried to have me removed from," I said. "I think we both understand who made the larger mistake today." The door closed. I walked back to the conference table and sat down across from Vera and Philip Strand. I placed my hands flat on the table. "I sincerely apologize for that interruption," I said. "Shall we continue?" Philip picked up his pen. He looked at me for a moment with an expression that was somewhere between assessment and something warmer. "Any operator who handles a family ambush that way in front of investors," he said, "can certainly handle 11 hotel properties. Show me where to sign." I should have known they would regroup. I had been married to my ex-husband for 6 years. I knew how his family operated. They did not process failure as information. They processed it as an obstacle requiring a different approach. Within 48 hours, a coordinated review campaign appeared across every public-facing platform my business used. Google, Yelp, Wedding Wire, The Knot. Anonymous accounts posted detailed complaints claiming my catering company had failed to deliver at major events, overcharged clients, and misrepresented staffing levels in contracts. The language was too precise to be random. Someone with marketing experience had written them. The accounts had no other activity. They had been created solely for this purpose. My phone started ringing before 7 in the morning the next day. A bride whose reception we were catering in 6 weeks sent a panicked message asking what was happening. A corporate client emailed to say she had received a forwarded screenshot and wanted to understand the context. A venue coordinator I had worked with for 3 years called to ask, carefully, whether everything was all right on my end. I answered every single one the same way. My operational records and client history are documented and available. I welcome any review. I did not post a rebuttal. I did not respond publicly to any of the reviews. My ex-husband's younger sister, Cassandra, was a communications consultant. She'd built a small but legitimate reputation, helping businesses manage their public narratives. I recognized her fingerprints on every word. She was smart enough to use any emotional public response I made as content for the next round. I was not going to give her anything to work with. But I was watching. His father had spent 30 years building a network inside Nashville's commercial real estate and hospitality corridors. He knew the right people at the right clubs and sat on the right boards. He began working those connections with the methodical efficiency of a man who believes his relationships are permanent assets. He told a developer I had collaborated with on 2 projects that I was under review by the Tennessee Department of Revenue for unreported catering receipts. He told a venue owner I had partnered with for 4 years that a former employee had filed a wage complaint against me. Neither of these things was true. Both of them reached the right ears before I knew they were being said. 2 clients sent termination emails in the same week. No calls. No explanation beyond politely worded legal language requesting file transfers. I sat at my desk and looked at the projected revenue impact for the quarter. 11% gone. Potentially more if the pattern continued. My kitchen manager knocked on the open door frame and waited. "Sit down," I said. "Close the door." She sat. I looked at her for a moment. "They are going to make a mistake," I said. "People who do things this way always do. Our job right now is to keep the operation clean and stay patient." She didn't look convinced. She nodded anyway. What neither she nor my ex-husband's family knew was that his father had already made the mistake. He had simply not realized it yet. In his effort to establish himself as a legitimate industry player, he had begun approaching hospitality clients and making promises that required a level of operational infrastructure his family did not possess. He was selling access to procurement networks, vendor relationships, and permitting leverage that existed only in his description of them. I knew this because one of the clients he approached called me directly. The catering director for a large private event company had been contacted by my ex-husband's father with an offer to facilitate a complex multi-venue food service arrangement involving out-of-state vendors. She called my personal line because she had worked with me before and something about the conversation had made her uneasy. He had been unable to answer specific questions about Tennessee Alcohol Beverage Commission licensing requirements for temporary caterers. She wanted to know if I was aware of him representing himself in connection with my industry. I thanked her. I told her I would be in touch. Then I opened a file I had been holding for 3 weeks. A referral had come through an indirect channel shortly after my divorce was finalized. A man named Landlord was reportedly seeking high-end event production partnerships for a series of luxury private gatherings with international guest lists. The preliminary figures were significant. Before I took any meeting, I did what I always do. I ran a background investigation. Landlord was not an event producer. He was operating under a federal indictment for wire fraud and money laundering connected to a series of fraudulent investment events that had taken place across 4 states over 18 months. The FBI Financial Crimes Unit had been building an active case for over a year. Any vendor or partner who agreed to facilitate his event structure would be walking into a conspiracy charge without knowing it. I declined the referral immediately. I secured the file. Now I looked at that file with different eyes. My ex-husband's father was desperate for credibility. He needed a marquee client to prove the family's competing venture was real. He needed something that looked like a win, and he was cutting corners on due diligence because he always had. Because nothing he had ever pursued had required him to look too carefully at what was underneath. I printed the Lorne file. I left it partially visible on my office desk during a window when I knew my front-of-house coordinator, a young man named Perry, would be alone in the room to pull a printed vendor schedule. Perry had been quietly passing my calendar activity to my ex-husband for 5 weeks. I had known for 3 of those weeks. A known leak is not a vulnerability. It is a tool. I made sure Perry overheard me mention in passing that I was trying to figure out how to protect the Lorne engagement given my current operational pressures. I used the word exclusive twice. I mentioned a retainer figure that would make anyone's eyes move. Perry was out of the building within 20 minutes. I walked to the monitoring station and pulled up the desk camera feed. He had photographed the file and sent it before he reached the parking structure. Efficient. Exactly as expected. I gave it 3 days. My ex-husband's father called Lorne on the 2nd. I was not present for that dinner. I received the account due federal discovery documents later. My ex-husband's father reserved a private room at a restaurant in the Gulch. He ordered well. He presented the family venture as a premier event production infrastructure with established vendor networks, licensed operational capacity, and experience managing high-volume hospitality logistics. He told Lorne that I had been too cautious, too risk-averse to see the scale of what he was offering. My ex-husband sat across from Lorne and nodded. When Lorne asked whether the financial arrangement could be structured to minimize domestic reporting requirements, my ex-husband's father said yes. My ex-husband signed the consulting agreement. There were two federal agents seated at a table on the other side of the room. They had been there since before my ex-husband's family arrived. The private dining room had been equipped that afternoon. I spent that evening on the back porch of my house off Hillsborough Pike, drinking chamomile tea and watching the Nashville skyline settle into dark. My business reviews were still actively suppressed by the anonymous campaign. Two replacement clients had gone quiet after the revenue board posts. One venue partner had paused our referral arrangement, pending clarification. I felt completely still, because the two men who had walked into my building and told me my success was something they could simply redirect had spent the last hour explaining to a federal informant in careful detail how to move money without triggering a domestic wire report. The trap had closed. They just hadn't heard the sound yet. What happened next was not something I planned. After I sent Cassandra a single email with 3 attachments, bank routing documents, a loan agreement, and an insurance claim, she did not call me immediately. She called her attorney. Then she called her mother. Then she called me, and her voice on the phone was the specific kind of quiet that people use when they are holding something very heavy and trying not to drop it. She discovered that her brother had taken out 2 personal loans totaling $180,000 using her professional liability policy as collateral. She was listed as a guarantor on both. He had done this while she was traveling for a client conference in Chicago. He had used her home printer, her notary contact, and her business checking account routing number to make the transfers appear clean. The man she had spent weeks defending, the man she had written 3 smear campaigns for, had used her financial identity as a vehicle for his own desperation, while she was 3 states away. I told her everything I knew. I told her about the federal investigation. I told her what was coming. The silence on the line was a long one. "What do you need from me?" she finally said. "Document everything and protect yourself first," I told her. "After that, I need the truth." Cassandra spent the next 72 hours pulling records. She found the forged signatures. She found the routing confirmations. She found a text chain between her brother and father discussing how to use her industry contacts to accelerate the campaign against me without her full knowledge or consent. They had treated her professional network as a resource. They had treated her as an instrument. She had spent weeks building a case against me for a man who had been quietly leveraging her identity to fund a business venture he had no qualifications to run. She brought everything to my office in a folder she carried at arm's length, the way people carry things they want to set down permanently. We sat across from each other at the same table where her family had tried to ambush me 6 weeks earlier. The air between us was not warm, but it was clear. Sometimes clarity is the better thing. "I wrote those reviews," she said. "I built the entire campaign. I want to formally retract every single piece of it with a correction statement under my own name." "I know you did," I said, "and I want you to, but do it on your terms, in your own words, when you're ready. Your credibility in this industry is worth something. Don't waste the correction by rushing it." She looked at me for a moment. "Why are you helping me?" she said. "Because they used both of us," I said, "and because you are not the problem I'm trying to solve." The arrests happened on a Wednesday morning. Federal agents arrived at the address my ex-husband's father had filed as the business headquarters of his venture, which was, I later confirmed, a shared co-working suite he had rented on a month-to-month basis using a debit card. At 9:22 in the morning, they came with warrants and moved with the practiced efficiency of people who have done this many times and have no interest in the theatrical version of it. My ex-husband's father was placed in custody in the common area in front of 2 people who had come to use the printer. My ex-husband was apprehended in the parking structure of his apartment building. He had reportedly been on the phone when the agents approached. He was still holding it when they put the cuffs on. The charges included conspiracy to commit wire fraud, facilitation of illegal financial transfers across state lines, and submission of a fraudulent business registration document. The last charge related to a state filing they had submitted using falsified operational references that included my company's name and licensing history without my knowledge or authorization. Cassandra's attorney filed a civil fraud complaint against her brother that same afternoon. She issued a full public correction of every review and article she had published, with a detailed statement explaining the campaign had been executed on the basis of information she'd been given without her informed verification and using resources taken from her without her consent. The statement was measured, professional, and precise. It was, in its own way, the most effective thing she had ever written. It moved through the same hospitality and event planning networks the original campaign had traveled, and it moved faster. By the following Monday, 2 of the clients who had gone quiet called to re-engage. 6 months later, I was standing on the rooftop terrace of the Meridian South building on a clear October evening with the Nashville skyline spread out below us in every direction. Cassandra was standing beside me. She had joined Callard Collective as director of brand communications 3 months after the divorce from her own professional reputation from her brother's choices was finalized. She brought her full network, her precision, and the kind of credibility that survives hard weather because it went through the weather honestly. She handed me a glass of wine and looked out at the city. "He called the office last week," she said. "My brother. He left a voicemail asking if I could put in a word about a project manager position." "What did you do?" "I had the number permanently blocked across every business line we operate," she said. "And then I went to get lunch." I raised my glass. She raised hers. Below us, the city moved the way cities always do, constant and indifferent and full of people building things that belong entirely to them. "To everyone who told us to step aside," I said. Cassandra looked out at the skyline for a moment before she answered. "And to the price they paid for the lesson," she said. The glasses touched with a clean sound that carried briefly in the cool October air and then dissolved into everything below. I thought a lot about what this experience actually taught me, and it is not what most people expect me to say. It is not about revenge. I do not have time for revenge, and I do not find it interesting. What I carry from this is simpler than that. When you build something real, with your own labor and your own sleepless years, no one can take it from you by simply announcing that they will. They would have to have built something equivalent, and the people who spend their lives assuming other people's work belongs to them by default never develop that capacity. They cannot build what you built. That is exactly why they came for what you already had. Document everything. Know who is in your circle and why. And never confuse someone's proximity to your success with their contribution to it. Those are not the same thing, and the difference between them is the whole story. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this if it hit something real. I'll see you in the next one. I keep coming back to that moment when the phone clicked off and the room went silent. Not because it felt like victory. It didn't. Not right then. It felt like stillness. The kind that only comes when you've done the work so completely that there's nothing left to defend. What I understand now is that everything that happened, the ambush, the reviews, the clients who went quiet, the federal warrants, was a chain of consequences set in motion long before that Tuesday morning. My ex-husband's father had spent decades moving through rooms on the strength of his name and his connections, never once building anything from the ground up. My ex-husband had spent 6 years watching me build something real and deciding that proximity to it was the same as ownership. Those patterns don't start with one bad decision. They accumulate quietly until the weight of them requires someone else to carry. I was not willing to carry it anymore. And that choice, made not in anger, but in clarity, was what changed everything. There is something I want to say about Cassandra, because her part of this story matters as much as mine. She was smart. She was genuinely talented at what she did. But she aimed that talent in the direction she was pointed without asking enough questions about who was doing the pointing. When the truth came through, when she saw the forged signatures, the routing confirmations, the text chains, she didn't run from it, she sat with it. And then she acted with more integrity than most people manage in circumstances that comfortable. That is not a small thing. Knowing the truth is one thing, having the character to stand in it publicly, to correct the record under your own name when the easier path is silence. That takes something real. I have a lot of respect for what she chose. What I've learned living through this and building past it is that results are honest in a way that people often aren't. The business survived because it was built correctly. The deal closed because the work behind it was sound. The campaign against me collapsed not because I fought it the loudest, but because I kept the operation clean while it burned itself out. You cannot fake 7 years of completed projects and documented client relationships. You cannot manufacture the kind of trust that comes from showing up the same way every single time, regardless of who is watching. The intelligence it takes to run something real, to understand contracts, to read people accurately, to know when to move and when to wait, that is not inherited. It is built the same way the business was built. One decision at a time, under pressure, without a safety net. My ex-husband's family mistook confidence for competence. That is a mistake you only get to make so many times before the gap becomes undeniable. And the endurance, the years of shared commercial kitchen hours and secondhand vans and being told I was chasing something that wasn't mine to chase, that is the part no one can take. Not with a legal filing, not with an anonymous review campaign, not with a folder dropped on a conference table in front of investors. The years are already spent. They already became something. What they became is mine. I don't carry what happened as a wound. I carry it as information. About who shows up when the stakes are real. about the difference between someone who wants what you've built and someone who is willing to build beside you. Cassandra is the second kind. I know that now. The glasses touched on that October rooftop, and the sound dissolved into the city below us. And I thought, this is what it feels like when the work holds.